All right, so the next couple of chapters that we're going to be talking about are going to be the lymphatic system and the endocrine system. And looking at these two systems, the lymphatic system, a lot of times people will refer to it as the immune system, and that kind of cuts out some of the things that it actually does. So, lymphatic system is a much better way to refer to the system, even though an overwhelming majority of what it does do has to pertain to our immune system and our health. The endocrine system, that is the network of hormones and the communication system that is built within our body. And so we will talk about that one as we get into both of these systems over the next couple of weeks. So looking at the first slide, it talks about the functions of your lymphatic system. And what some people don't understand about their bodies is that you actually have two vascular systems. So if we talk about vessels within the body, everybody immediately goes to the blood vessels, and they know about the arteries and the veins and transporting the blood through the body. Not as many people are aware of the fact that we actually have a lymphatic system, which is another series of vessels that are going to network through our body and carry fluid from one location to the next. Now, part of the reason why the lymphatic system or the lymphatic vessels are not as well known is because it lacks one of the major things that the blood vessels have, which is a major pump that kind of drives everything forward, which is the heart. So with that, it's not quite as complex of a system as our cardiovascular system, but like I said, very much unknown compared to our blood vessels. So we do have a series of vessels that are going to work through the body. Their major goal is to collect excess fluid. So when your body does work, we've already talked several times about the fact that nothing works at 100% efficiency, and you are going to have waste product because of that. And some of that waste product is going to be in the form of a fluid, and your body has to be able to get rid of that. And so the job of these vessels is to collect that excess fluid and then direct it so that we can eventually remove it from our body altogether. So even though we have this lymphatic system, it doesn't have a pump working for it. It does work very closely to our, or it does work very closely with our circulatory system to eliminate that fluid. And we'll talk about that connection a little bit when we get a little bit deeper into the conversation. So it talks about taking fluid away from the interstitial spaces. So these are going to be the areas between cells. So that space that is kind of open, you do have fluid that will kind of leak into those areas and get into those areas. That is the fluid that needs to be collected and cleaned out. Otherwise, it just continues to build up. So the fluid as it's collected, and one thing that I do want to touch on, that fluid varies from day to day. So when we talk about lymphatic fluid, depending on what you've come in contact with, depending on what you've eaten in your diet, what makes up your lymphatic fluid will be different from one day to the next and will be different from one person to the next. We do move it over to the bloodstream. Like I said, that is going to be the major way that we do filter it out of the body. And the other big thing that your lymphatic system will do for you is it's how we transport fats into our bloodstream. Now, we talked about fats within the digestive system and the fact that they're very sticky and they like to clump together in these globules. Because of that, they're not always the easiest thing to transfer from one place to another. And so the lymphatic system is going to assist in that. And even though we hear a lot about reducing the amount of fat in our diet, not wanting a lot of fat in our bloodstream, we do still need to have a certain amount in order to be able to do all the jobs that we need to efficiently. And so as long as it's kept in moderation and the right amounts, having that fat within your bloodstream is very healthy. And then the last one, I purposely put it the last one on the slide, is that yes, your lymphatic system is going to help with your immunity, fighting off infection and those things that get into your body that are not supposed to be there. So the next slide kind of shows how the exchange of fluid is going to happen between the lymphatic system or your lymphatic vessels and your blood vessels. And I would really like you guys to take your textbook out and take a look at this, because in the packet it is black and white. It's kind of hard to distinguish. It just looks like a bunch of tubes running all over the place. But if you look at it in your textbook, you'll notice that you've got different colors. You have red, blue, and purple. Those are all going to indicate your blood vessels. So the blue vessels are your veins, the purple ones are the capillaries, the connectors between the two, and then your red vessels are going to be the arteries. Now you'll notice that kind of intertwining through that, you have a series of green tubes, and those are your lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels are 99% of the time going to be depicted in the color green whenever you see them in a drawing or a picture or a textbook. Now, the one thing that I want you to notice about the lymphatic vessels is where the blood vessels are continuous. You could go into any one of those blood vessels and you could follow your way and get somewhere else. If you look at the lymphatic vessels, the green ones, you'll notice they're all dead ends. So they eventually get to a point where they terminate and they no longer move forward. And that's one of the biggest difference between the lymphatic vessels and your circulatory blood vessels. In your circulatory system, if you were to track a blood cell from your heart as it leaves your heart and goes through your body, it would go through all the parts of your body, it would make a full circle, and eventually it would come back to your heart. In the case of your lymphatic vessels, they don't do that. They run one way. They're one directional. And so they start from the head, the top of the body, and they work their way down. And eventually they make their way down to your feet, your lower extremities. And at that point, they do terminate and they end. If they haven't gotten rid of their fluid, at that point, that fluid will start to collect and build. And that's why a lot of times if you see somebody that has an issue with their lymphatic system and it's not clearing out that fluid, the swelling is going to begin in their feet, their ankles, and their calves, because that is where all of that fluid is eventually going to get to those dead ends and not have anywhere to go. But like I said, I would strongly suggest taking out your textbook, finding that picture in your textbook in the lymphatic chapter and seeing it in color, because being able to see those different colors set against each other just gives you a little bit better visual as to how all of that connects together. So if you look at the slide that talks about the lymphatic vessels, some of this I've already discussed. It's just hard not to when you're talking about the pictures and some of that initial information. But one of the biggest things that is going to make them different, you'll notice that the walls are going to be thinner than those of blood vessels. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the entire goal of the lymphatic vessels is to collect that fluid and get it out of your body. So anytime that you have a structure where its whole purpose is to move things in and out, you don't want it to be incredibly thick, because the thicker it is, the harder it's going to be to move that material in and out of the vessel. So by having a thinner wall, it allows for that movement to happen much easier, which allows your body to be more efficient, which is the entire goal of our anatomy design. You'll notice that there are 3 layers. This is a theme that keeps coming up when we've talked about the heart, when we talked about the stomach, when we talked about blood vessels, when we get into the uterus. I know we're not there yet, but when we get to that, you keep seeing this reoccurring theme of these structures having 3 layers. So they have an inner layer, they have an outer layer, and sandwiched in between the two, you have a muscular layer. No different with the lymphatic vessels. Okay, so you have that inner layer, which is made of endothelial tissue, and then you have a connective tissue on the outside, and then sandwiched in between those two, you get that muscle middle layer. Now, once fluid gets into your lymphatic vessels, like I said, it's a one-way street. So it is always moving in the same direction, and that is going to be from head to toe. It's always moving down towards your feet once it gets pulled into or collected into the lymphatic vessels themselves. And then I already talked about that last point, that if that fluid doesn't get pushed out, that it's eventually going to be stuck within the lower extremities and just kind of pool there and cause a lot of swelling and other problems. The next slide that you guys have talks about lymph fluid, and lymph fluid is going to be that material that has built up in your body that's not supposed to be there. If you go home and you're cleaning in your house and you don't put gloves on, that cleaning liquid material that you put your hands in, some of that is going to get into your skin and it gets into your tissues. That can be some of that excess fluid. If you are working out and you lift weights and you push your muscles to the point that they start going through the process of fermentation and producing lactic acid, that lactic acid is not supposed to be there. Eventually, it has to get worked out. Even something as simple as eating a food that is very salty will change that fluid content in and around your cells, and your lymphatic vessels would have to pick up that excess fluid. So once that fluid is located within the body, we are going to pull it into the lymphatic vessels, and it's basically a draining process at that point. So I talked about the fact that your lymphatic vessels are going to work very closely to your blood vessels, and the reason for that is the lymphatic vessels, because they terminate and there's no pump to keep that fluid moving forward, we need to eliminate it. And so by having a lymphatic vessel run right next door to a blood vessel, now we use the process of diffusion. It diffuses out of the lymphatic vessel into the blood vessel. And where do the blood vessels all run through? Eventually they're going to run through the kidneys, and they go through that filtering process. So that material is filtered out, that filtrate is produced within the glomerulus, and all of that shifting within the structures of the kidney is going to happen. If it's bad material, it's going to stay out. If it's good material, it will move back into the bloodstream. But that is how we get that lymphatic fluid eventually eliminated from the body. We get it into the lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels run next door to a blood vessel. We move it into the blood vessel. Blood vessels are eventually going to get routed through the kidneys. Kidneys filter it out, and the next time you use the restroom, you're going to eliminate that from your body. Now, because of the fact, if you find the slide that talks about how lymph moves, because of the fact that it does not have a heart to pump it and move that fluid forward, we still don't want that fluid to just sit in one location, because then it would pool all over the body. So strategically, your lymphatic vessels are going to be placed, like I said, next to blood vessels, and the beating of the heart and the contraction of your blood vessels with that beating heart is actually enough, with them being right next door. The movement of the blood vessel will hit up against that lymphatic vessel and cause that movement. They're also strategically located in and around your muscles, so that when you get up and start walking and your muscles are contracting and moving, they are going to push up against those lymphatic vessels, and they will help that lymph move so that it's not just pooling in one location. It also talks about in that slide your respiratory movements. So the active breathing, again, you have air coming in and out, expanding, contracting. Any of that movement is going to help keep that fluid moving in the right direction. And very similar to your blood vessels, you guys also have valves that are going to be located within your lymph vessels. So we talked about valves back when we talked about our veins. They're like little trap doors, and when the heart is not beating, those trap doors are closed down. When the heart beats, the pressure causes the doors of the valve to lay flat up against the vessel walls, and blood is able to move forward. Even though we don't have a heart connected to the lymphatic system, those valves will do the same thing. They make sure that with the movement of muscles, with the beating of the blood vessels, all of that is keeping that fluid moving forward. Once it gets past that certain point, so once it's advanced past that valve, those valves will close back down and make sure that the fluid can't run backwards. So we need to make sure that it's always moving in a forward direction, just so that it can't back up and pool and cause swelling in a lot of different places. The next slide that you have discusses lymph nodes. So when we look at lymph nodes, this is something that people tend to have a little bit of familiarity with, just because if you go to the doctor, they take you in, do height, weight. One of the first things the doctor is going to do once they get you into the exam room is they are going to feel your throat. And what they're actually feeling for is they're feeling for what your lymph nodes, what the texture of your lymph nodes is, so to speak. Because the lymph nodes are designed to trap any foreign particles. They're little filtering systems that you have all throughout your body. And when you guys see pictures of this, it's not uncommon when you see pictures of lymph nodes that they will show them from head to about the hips, and then it looks like once you get to your legs, you have no more lymph nodes below your waist. That's not the case. You have lymph nodes from head to toe because you never know when an infection is going to get into your body. You could step on a rusty nail with your foot and obviously break the skin. That rusty nail dives into the tissues of your body. You have all these foreign invaders, pathogens, whatever is on that nail that is now introduced to your body. You have to have lymph nodes all over because you never know when your skin is going to be broken. You never know when or how a foreign invader is going to get in. So lymph nodes are placed all throughout your body. The average person is going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 lymph nodes, head to toe. We do have certain areas where there is a higher cluster or collection of lymph nodes just because they're higher problem areas. Those areas that are open to the outside world are going to be more likely to encounter foreign invaders. So if you think of your nose and mouth, obviously every time you breathe in, you're not taking in pure air. You're taking in everything that is floating around. Likewise, your ears are a point of entry. So we have a cluster of lymph nodes that is in our neck just because we have all of those openings to the outside world. You also have a cluster of lymph nodes that is in the groin, so in the bend of your leg and the core of your body. And this again is because you have points of entry. So you have openings to the outside world in both the male and female body. And while we usually associate those parts of the body and things leaving the body, because they are openings, there is the potential for things to come in as well. And so because you have that threat, we have a collection of lymph nodes in that area, just so we have better capability of dealing with those invaders if they do get into our body. The other location where we have a high cluster of lymph nodes is actually in the armpit, which initially that sounds kind of weird because there's no openings there. But if you think about the conditions within your armpit, majority of the day, our arms are going to be down by our sides. So because you have that folded over area, number one, it tends to be a very warm area on our body. Also, because it is our arm hanging down by our side, it's a dark area. And it's one of the major places where most people will sweat. So it's a area that tends to have excess liquid from time to time. So warm, dark, and moisture. Those three things combined are a breeding ground for bacteria. And so because even though we don't have a true opening into our body in our armpit, because of that breeding ground for all those bacteria, we have a cluster of lymph nodes in our armpit as well. Now, typically when you go to the doctor, they'll check the ones in your neck because those are the easiest ones to get to. You have clothing on that cover the other two areas, so it just makes it a little bit harder to get a good feel for what's going on with the lymph nodes. If you are sick and you have a bunch of foreign invaders in your body, whether they be a bacteria, whether they be a virus, pathogen, whatever it is, as that lymphatic fluid runs through those lymph nodes, so you have your lymphatic vessels, and every so often positioned on that lymphatic vessel, you'll have a lymph node. Basically, it's a filtering system. So whatever fluid is in your lymphatic vessel is going to get pushed through that lymph node, and it filters the material in the lymph. So as that material gets filtered out, it is going to then hold on to anything that is not supposed to be in the body, and it will hold on to it. So over time, if you have a lot of foreign material that is in that lymph fluid, it is going to get held in that lymph node, and it gets packed into the lymph node, and that's why over time those lymph nodes will get very hard. They feel like little rocks underneath your skin, and that's why we initially check them, is because if you have a lot of foreign material packed into those lymph nodes, that's an indicator right away to your doctor that something is going on in this body and we need to figure out what the foreign invader is. So the next slide talks about the areas of lymph nodes, the locations. So we talked about the cervical ones, the ones in your neck, the axillary ones, the ones in your armpit, the inguinal, so the groin region. Those are the three high ones. This is, again, a picture I don't care for because it looks like once you get to your legs, you have no lymph nodes below that point. absolutely not the case. You do have them from head to toe. Your tonsils are glorified lymph nodes. So when you talk about the tonsils and people having their tonsils removed, those are the largest lymph nodes that we have in the human body. You can live without them because of the fact that you have 600 to 700 in your body as a whole. So even if you have to remove the tonsils for whatever reason, they are getting too much and they're always causing infections and things like that, it will just then fall to the remaining 600 to 700, even though they're much smaller in size, to go ahead and deal with those foreign invaders. So you have a backup system. Doesn't work quite as well, but it is a backup system nonetheless. So the job of lymph nodes, as I already talked about, they are filters. If you had to describe them in a single word, a lymph node is a filter. Any fluid that is in your lymphatic vessel is going to get run through those lymph nodes, and it is going to clean out anything that is not supposed to be there, and it holds it so that your body can figure out what it is. Is this something that's going to cause harm? Do we need to call in some of our defending cells to break it down and kill it so that it can't do any harm? But the biggest thing that it does is it takes that material out of circulation. Because if you have a foreign invader in your lymph fluid and it's circulating through your body, it now has access to anything that it comes in contact with. Every single cell, once it gets into your blood vessels, it's in your bloodstream, and there's just a lot for it to potentially cause problems with. So these filters are there so that as soon as we possibly can, we filter it out of the lymph fluid so that it doesn't come in contact with a lot of different parts of your body. And that's why your lymph nodes are so important. So think of them as filters. They're located from head to toe. They're going to clean out the lymph fluid, find anything that doesn't belong there, and hang on to it so it cannot continue to circulate through your system. It will allow for your white blood cells, and we'll talk more about those in our next conversation, but it will allow for your white blood cells to then locate it, decide what it is, and figure out how to attack it. Now, the design of a lymph node is very specific. So the lymph node itself is going to have multiple points of entry on the back side of the lymph node, and I will show you guys a picture of this when we meet face to face, but you have the lymph node itself, multiple points of entry on the back, and then there's only one single point of exit on the front side. And the design feature of that is that it actually then has to slow down that fluid so that it gives the body more time to take a look at the material that's there and filter out anything that's not supposed to be there. So the next one that you guys have, if you move to the next slide, it actually talks about the thymus gland. And so the thymus gland is located right behind your sternum, so your breastbone. And the unique thing about the thymus gland is that it is one of the few things that we have in the human body that actually gets smaller with age. So a lot of times when we think about growth and development, things get bigger as we age. And this is the one thing that will decrease over time and become smaller. So when you're a child, it's very large, and that's because at that point you really haven't come in contact with a whole lot of different infections, and so you're going to be reducing a lot of cells to fight off all those infections that you're coming in contact with for the first time.